Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are moving on to journal collection number 49, dating from the year 1858. Emerson will turn 55 in this year, and this is one of the shortest of the journal collections. I'm not sure why, perhaps in the biographical material we'll learn that, but it's very short, and I believe it does span the entirety of 1858, as all the other journal collections span 1 year periods. Anyway, with that said, I will go ahead and read, starting with the biographical editorial commentary, and then go right from there into Emerson's first entry. Mr. Emerson seems to have made no distant lecturing tour in the winter. One lecture in Philadelphia is recorded February 3rd. In March, he gave a course of 6 lectures in Boston: 1. Country Life; 2. Works and Days; 3. Powers of the Mind; 4. Natural Method of Mental Philosophy; 5. Memory; 6. Self-Possession. Mr. Cabot gives in Memoir an abstract of the parts not printed. Appendix F, pages 753 to 756. In January, Mr. Emerson wrote to his Aunt Mary, quote, "I abide in my old barrel, or, if you will, coop or tub, and mean to keep my eyes open whether anything offers to be observed or not." End quote. End of note. The question is, have you got the interesting facts? That yours have cost you time and labor, and that you are a person of wonderful parts, and of wonderful fame in society or town in which you live, is nothing to the purpose. Society is a respecter of persons, but nature is not. 'Tis fatal that I do not care a rush for all you have recorded, cannot read it if I should try. Henry Thoreau says, "The Indians know better natural history than you, they with their type fish and fingers, the sons of hands." I should go to the naturalist with a new feeling if he had promised to teach me what birds say to each other at midsummer, and what and when convene at autumn. I found Henry yesterday in my woods. He thought nothing to be hoped from you, if his bit of mold under your feet was not sweeter to you to eat than any in this world, or in any world. We talked of the willows. He says, "'Tis impossible to tell when they push the bud, which so marks the arrival of spring, out of its dark scales. It is done and doing all winter. It is begun in the previous autumn. It seems one steady push from autumn to spring." I say, how divine these studies! Here there is no taint of mortality. How aristocratic, and of how defiant a beauty! This is the garden of Edelweissen. He says Wachusett is 27 miles from Fairhaven, and Monadnock about 50. Perhaps it would be a safe episode to the intellect chapters to give an account of the gentleman in search of the practical, as illustrated by the history of the turbine, which is valued here at $100,000, and there is discarded as useless, and on which there seems no settled verdict to be had. J. Bright of Rochdale said that the use of machinery in America and in England went by fancy, and I learned in my search for the pioneers in Illinois and Wisconsin, quote, "They were visionary men, not practical, and all bankrupted," end quote. And my Western banker at Adrian and Mr. Hooper's at Lexington may serve to show what practical people are. January 28th, 1858. The panegyrics of Hafitz addressed to his Shahs and Agas show poetry, but they show deficient civilization. The finest genius in England or France would feel the absurdity of fabling such things to his queen or emperor about their saddle as Hafitz and Enwary do not stick at. When a dog barks on the stage of a theater, the audience are interested. What acting can take their attention from the dog? But if in the real action which their scene represents a dog had barked, it would have not been heard. The politics of Massachusetts are cowardly. Oh, for a Roman breath and the courage that advances and dictates. When we get an advantage, as in Congress, the other day, it is because our adversary has made a fault, and not that we have made a thrust. Why do we not say, we are abolitionists of the most absolute abolition, as every man that is a man must be? Only the Hottentots, only the barbarous or semi-barbarous societies are not. We do not try to alter your laws in Alabama, nor yours in Japan or the Fiji Islands, but we do not admit or permit a trace of them here. Nor shall we suffer you to carry your thugism north, south, east, or west into a single rod of territory which we control. We intend to set and keep a cordon sanitaire all around the infected district, and by no means suffer the pestilence to spread. At Springfield I told Lamoureux that I thought metaphysics owed very little to the French mind. What we owe is not to the professors, but to the incidental remarks of a few deep men, namely to Montaigne, Malebranche, Pascal, and Montesquieu. The analytic mind will not carry us far. Taking to pieces is the trade of those who cannot construct. In a healthy mind, the love of wholes, the power of generalizing, is usually joined with a keen appreciation of differences. But they are so bent on the aim and genius of the thing that they don't mind the surface faults. But mind of low and surface power pounce on some fault of expression, of rhetoric, or petty misstatement of fact, and quite lose sight of the main purpose. I knew a lady who thought she had heard my discourse before, because the word arena was in both of the two discourses. Yet we must remember Descartes and Malebranche. Cousin is only a pupil of Hegel. The English think if you add 100 facts, you will have made a right step towards a theory. If you add 1,000, so much the nearer. But these lines never meet. A good mind infers from 2 or 3 facts, or from one, as readily as from a legion. Witness Kepler, Newton, Dalton, etc., who are born with a taste for the manners of nature, and catch the whole tune from a few bars. It is impossible to be a gentleman and not be an abolitionist, for a gentleman is one who is fulfilled with all nobleness and imparts it, is the natural defender and raiser of the weak and oppressed, like the Cid. But these are snobs. In the southern country, their idea of a gentleman is a striker. There are abundance of their gentlemen garroting in New York streets. 1776 to 1858. 82 years count the age of the Union, and yet they say the nation is as old and infirm as a man is with those years. Now a building is not in its prime till after 500 years, nor should a nation be, and we aged at 80. The populace drag down the gods to their own level. Glaumorceau, perfect in the center of a barrel of Baldwins, this 20th of February, 1858. Editor states that written in later, as good today, 15th February 1864. February 27th. Felton told of Agassiz that when someone applied to him to read lectures or some other paying employment, he answered, "I can't waste my time in earning money." Dr. Holmes told a story of John Hunter that, being interrupted by a professional call when he was dissecting a tiger, he said, "Do you think I can leave my work for your damned guinea?" Here is Mr. Rarey in London, showing in 1858 how to tame a horse by appealing to his heart and his mind. 'Tis as it should be, only we have rather slow about it. I ought to be as old as Homer and Theseus at least. So the taming or the conquering of a dog is not yet a science, and the language of birds is a fable still. I think the fame of Theseus has come down a peg or two since the appearance of Mr. Rarey. His maxim is, "He who would tame a horse must not know fear or anger." It seems as if there should be a new Olympian Games in which the unsolved questions should be proposed for prizes. What is imagination? Will? Which is first, truth or goodness? Nor can we dispose of these gods by saying, these are simple acts of one power. I admit the perpetual pertinence of the reference to amount of manhood or humanity. What have all your inquiries or skills or reforms by you inaugurated profited you? The roarers for liberty turn out to be slaves themselves. The thunderers of the Senate are poor creatures in the street, and when canvassing for votes. And when in their own village the question is, how many honest men are there in town? Men who will not take a petty advantage and are severer watchers of themselves than of their debtor. Why, they are as rare among the reputable as among the unreputed. The great gentleman, scornful and lofty, will do very shabby things, and a career of triumphantly logical reform has consumed all the domestic virtue and private charm of the athlete. His wife hates him, children do not love him, scholars dislike him, and he is miserable alone. Races. All the children born in the last 3 years or 8 years should be charged with love of liberty, for their parents have been filled with Kansas and anti-slavery. Moral sense makes genius in spite of even disowning by genius. Why moral sentiment is laming. My theory of the present basis of society being brutish, each feeding on other, but the basis of intellect and morals is aid, and, the more angels, the more room, You are too historical by half. I show you a grievance, and you proceed to inquire not if it is mischievous, but if it is old. I point the redress, and you inquire about a constitutional precedent for the redress. That which only requires perception, mischiefs that are rank and intolerable, which only need to be seen to be hated and attacked, with you are ground for argument, and you are already preparing to defend them. The reliance on simple perception constitutes genius and heroism, and that is the religion before us. Wordsworth's Prelude is not quite solid enough in its texture. It is rather a poetical pamphlet, though proceeding from a new and genuine experience. It is like Milton's Areopagitica, an immortal pamphlet. Many of Tennyson's poems, like Clara Vere de Vere, are only the sublime of magazine poems, admirable contributions for the Atlantic Monthly of the current month, but not classic and eternal. Milton would have raised his eyebrows a little at such pieces, but the Ulysses he would have approved. The sun athwart the cloud thought it no sin to use my land to put his rainbow in. Eloquence. What unreckoned element the orator carries with him, for example, silence. He performs as much or more with judicious pauses as by his best stroke. We can't afford to take the horse out of Montaigne's essays. May 11th. Yesterday with Henry Thoreau at the pond. Saw the creeper Vesey, Vesey, Vesey. Yorick is the very, or Wilson's thrush. The lamprey eel was seen by Wetherell building the pebble nest in the river. The sucker, so often seen dead in the river, needs a great deal of air, and hence perhaps dies when detained below. The trout was seen to kill the pickerel by darting at him and tearing off a fin every time. I hear account of the man who lives in the wilderness of Maine with respect, but with despair. It needs the doing hand to make the seeing eye, and my imbecile hands leave me always helpless and ignorant after so many years in the country. The beauty of the spectacle I fully feel, but 'tis strange that, more than the miracle of the plant and animal, is the impression of mere mass of broken land and water, say a mountain, precipices, and waterfalls, or the ocean side and stars. These affect us more than anything except men and women. But neither is Henry's hermit, 45 miles from the nearest house, important until we know what he is now, what he thinks of it on his return and after a year. Perhaps he has found it foolish and wasteful to spend a 10th or a 20th of his active life with a muskrat and fried fishes. I tell him that a man was not made to live in a swamp, but a frog. If God meant him to live in a swamp, he would have made him a frog. The charm which Henry uses for bird and frog and mink is patience. They will not come to him or show him aught until he becomes a log among the logs, sitting still for hours in the same place. Then they come around him and to him and show themselves at home. Peabody bird, pp, 5 bars. That is the note of the myrtle bird, penetrating and like the note of the meadowlark. Rouse said that a portrait should be made by a few continuous strokes, given the great lines, but if made by labor and by many corrections, though it became at last accurate, it would give an artist no pleasure, would look muddy. Anybody could make a likeness by main strength. Editor's note. Mr. Emerson wrote in later, "See the contrast of the 2 pages." That is the account of Thoreau's patience and Rouse's belief in Dash. End note. We are all better in attack than in defense. It is very easy to make acute objections to any style of life, but the objector is quite as vulnerable. Greenough thought my speculations unnatural, but the artist life seems to me intolerably thin and superficial. I feel the reasonableness of what the lawyer or merchant or laborer has to allege against readers and thinkers until I look at each of their wretched industries and find them without end or aim. Monotone. Chick-a-dee-dee, says the titmouse. T-p-p-p-p, says the Peabody bird, each as long as he lives, and the man who hears goes all his life saying his one proverb too. May 20th. Yesterday walked with Henry Thoreau to the spring in Everett's pasture and found, oh boy, here's some more Latin names, Ranunculus abortivus and bulbosus, and the Equestium hemel, scouring rush, and the Saxifraga pennsylvanica, and golden saxifrage. Heard a note of Henry's night warbler, and saw at Gorga's pond 2 yellow legs flying like ducks, only with a curlew cry, tell-tale, and a pair of tattlers who continued their researches in the water without regard to our spy-glasses. Saw the wood frog, Rana sylvatica. Nature has 2 ways of hiding her things, by light and by darkness. We never see mosses, lichens, grasses, birds, or insects which are near us every day, on account of our preoccupied mind. When our attention is at last called to them, they seem the only thing worth minding. June 8th. I spent the evening of June 7th at the American House with J.S. Babcock, the carpenter, Mr. Rouse's friend, a man of much reading and a very active and independent mind with an exclusive respect for intellectual power, not much sensibility to morals, though meaning to be fair, and of little hope for the race. The bully, he thinks, is the great god of the people, and if Sumner had killed Brooks, he thought the people would have worshipped Sumner. Now all the West despised him. I tried to show him how much the genius of Burke was indebted to his affection, what insight goodwill gives, and what eye waters all the virtues are, as humility, love, courage, etc., and what a blind man's bluff self-conceit makes. And he was candid enough. I told him that whatever was dreary and repels is not power, but the lack of power, which he allowed. He struggled hard for Webster, who was his idol. He thought the masses admire Cushing, Burlingame, Wise, or any man who has done the feat, who has succeeded. His opinion on books which he has read a good deal were his own and just. A man of eminently fortunate aspects, who is cordially hailed as bringing the glitter of the muse and good omen into certain houses, has, in spite of himself, and to his deep regret, in other quarters a dreary and withering aspect. What is the benefit of the doctrine of fate? Because under that form we learn the lesson of the immutability and universality of law. English politics are ever agreeable reading on this side of the water, whilst our own are the reverse. 'Tis partly that the virulent element is taken out by our disinterested position as spectators, like tobacco smoke straying through water, or the gas cleansed through water on its way to the jet, and partly the distinction of the persons who act in them, who for the most part are highly bred men. Editor's note. The following notes in the journal supplement Mr. Emerson's poetic chronicle and the poems of this happy experience in the primeval forest, so different from anything he had known before in its physical and social features. Yet the enormous Norway pines, cedars, and maples spoke to him the same language as their kin by Walden. In Stillman's interesting and faithful painting of the scene, done on the spot, between the group of Agassiz, Dr. Jeffries Wyman, and Dr. Estes Howe dissecting a fish with the humorous John Holmes, Dr. Holmes's charming brother, looking on, and the other of Lowell, Judge Hoare, Dr. Binney, and Horatio Woodman trying their rifles under Stillman's skilled instructions, stands Emerson, friend and admirer of these companions, but alone in thought. Stillman, in his autobiography, tells at length of this first camp of the Adirondack Club. Adirondack, August 2nd. Follinsby's Pond. It should be called Stillman's henceforward from the good camp which his gallant artist has built, and the good party he has led and planted here for the present at the bottom of the little bay which lies near the head of the lake. The lake is 2 miles long, 1 to 1 and half a miles wide, and surrounded by low mountains. Norway pine and white pine abound. An Adirondack camp is a shanty 6.5 feet high at the top, feet long at the eaves, closed on 3 sides and open to the fire, in one compartment of which persons can comfortably sleep, and in the other the sides containing the luggage. On the top of a large white pine in a bay was an osprey's nest, around which the ospreys were screaming 5 or 6. We thought there were young birds in it, and sent Preston to the top. This looked like an adventure. The tree might be 150 feet high, at least, 60 feet clean, straight stem, without a single branch, and, as Lowell and I measured it by the tape, as high as we could reach, 14 feet 6 inches in girth. Preston took advantage of a hemlock close by it and climbed till he got on the branches, then went to the top of the pine and found the nest empty, though the great birds wheeled and screamed about him. He said he could climb the bare stem of the pine, though it would be an awful hard work. When he came down, I asked him to go up it a little way, which he did, clinging to the corrugations of bark. Afterwards, Lowell watched long for a chance to shoot the osprey, but he soared magnificently and would not alight. Around the pond is totally virgin soil, without a clearing at any point, and covered with primitive woods, rock maple, beech, spruce, arbor vitae. We have seen bald eagles, loons, ravens, kingfishers, ducks, tattlers. We have killed 2 deer yesterday, both in the lakes, and otherwise fed our party with lake trout and river trout. River, lake, and brook trout cannot be scientifically discriminated, nor yet male from female. The wood thrush we heard at Stephen Bartlett's camp, but not since, and no other thrush. Lowell, next morning, was missing at breakfast, and when he came to camp, told me he had climbed Preston's pine tree. The midges, black flies, and mosquitoes are looked upon as the protectors of this superb solitude from the tourists, and also Blank Creek, leading from Racket River to Follinsby's Lake. There is no settler within 12 miles of our camp. Every man has his guide and boat and gun. Wednesday morn, Agassiz, Woodman, and I left the camp, each in a boat with his guide, for Big Tupper's Lake, passed through the inlet into Racket River, and down it 14 miles to Tupper, then up the lake 6 miles to Jenkins's, near the falls of the Bog River. Jenkins lives within the town of Atherton, which contains 11 souls. He has lately sold his farm to Coleman of Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. He assisted in surveying the town's lines and measured the breadth of the lake on ice, and reckons it 1.5 miles broad by 6 long, and Big Tupper he thinks about the same size. Editorial note. Mr. Emerson, by invitation of the Middlesex Agricultural Society, gave the address at the annual cattle show in the end of September. He is said to have called it the Man with the Hoe. It is essentially the same as the essay Farming in Society and Solitude. End note. Wealth consists in having at every moment a commanding position as regards your ends. A man in debt has not. Every hour is bringing certain opportunities to do somewhat desirable, but we are not free to use today or to promise tomorrow because we are already mortgaged to yesterday, having eaten our cake before we had earned it. Leisure, tranquility, grace, and strength belong to economy. Calvert mows his grass. Kant wears the same hat for 20 years. Minot never rides. Francis stays at home, and Hosmer goes to work every day. And each of these are free and able to do the new day, free and great as it, whilst the debtor is perplexed in the extreme, and because he is low in his own esteem, loses rank in the world. A great aim infuses itself alike into hours and ages. Quality makes all moments indifferent, and character pervades all acts. Time is the quality of the moment. Not fears, but forces. Fate. He saw and spoke truly who said, "When you have come to your highest thought, you say what is already known to the common man." Your fate is what you do, because first it is what you are. Editorial note. It does not appear why Mr. Emerson wrote much less than usual in this year's journal, nor why he gave so few lectures, and did not go on far journeys for this purpose. Perhaps the hard times had crippled the lyceum courses in many places. In December he went to New York, carrying with him his ancient and revered Sibyl, Aunt Mary Moody Emerson, who was to pass the remainder of her days with her Haskins relatives in Williamsburg, now part of Brooklyn. Mr. Emerson gave one or more lectures in New York and Philadelphia in this month. The following lines, cut from the Philadelphia Medical Journal, were found in one of his blank books. Most of the notice was missing. Quote, Mr. Emerson's lecture on town and country. Quote, we listened with great pleasure to the chaste and beautiful lecture of the Boston essayist. He is tall and literally thin, as was remarked by a medical friend. Quote, the least remarkable man on the stage, end quote. As usual in the lectures of our Yankee brethren, a good degree of sensible and well-applied physiology entered into the discussion. End quote. End note. This is the end of Emerson's journal collection number 49, dating from the year 1858, when the author was 55 years old. Thank you for listening.